All right, well, I have 6:30 sharp, so we're going to go ahead and get started in getting everybody familiar with Caregiver Homes and what they're doing in Indiana. I'm going to mute everybody except for the people involved in the presentation. That will allow us to keep down the background noise, and we're certainly going to have an opportunity to for questions at the end of this. Sue, I'm getting a message here that you need to enter your audio PIN in order for you to be heard for some reason or another. I don't know why it's saying that now. So you should be getting a message. It's saying it's sending the audio PIN. Peter, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, and I can hear you. Good. So everybody else is muted right now, and Sue, now we've got you. Good. Good. All right, so real quick, just a few introductions. My name is Richard Gaden. I'm with a company called the MMS Group. We are working very closely with Caregiver Homes in helping them roll this out into Indiana, and I am very, very honored to be associated with this organization and very pleased to be able to bring this to the state of Indiana and be a part of this. On the call this evening with us is going to be Susan Gregg, who is the Regional Director with Caregiver Homes for Indiana and Ohio, and Peter Bispikos, who is the State Director for Indiana. And at this time, I'm going to turn this over to Peter. He's going to talk about what's happening with Caregiver Homes in Indiana. Peter, just give me a second to change you over to presenter. There you are. You should be the presenter now. So you should be able to, no.
No.
That's not going to work, is it? Hang on a second. All right, here's what we're going to have to do. I forgot that there was a piece we need to organize. We'll get this ironed out. All right. Peter, I'm going to have to, I think I'm going to have to click it, so you're going to have to give me the move on to the next slide cue.
Okay. Well, first of all, thank you, Richard. No problem. Thank you for that kind introduction, and I want to say thank you to everybody who's joining us on the phone this evening. Caregiver Homes is a human services company that is bringing a new service to the state of Indiana that's authorized in 2 Medicaid waivers. I'm going to assume for the purposes of this conversation this evening that our audience has an intermediate level of Medicaid knowledge. And if you have any questions, certainly we're happy to answer them later, or you're welcome to follow up with us. The SFC that you see on the top of this slide stands for Structured Family Caregiving. As I suggested, it's a service that's new to Indiana, being brought to Indiana by Caregiver Homes, and it does some things that other services in the past have not done. I want to give you a kind of a 30,000-foot level understanding of the service, and then we'll go into a few more details and then the opportunities we have for employment. But I want you to understand really how special this is. This is a kind of a diagram of how the whole service works. And what's really distinct here is that we help people, both senior citizens or elders, and people with developmental disabilities, the bulk of whom have intellectual disabilities, live independently in their homes. And that's not a new concept in itself, but we do so with 24/7 live-in caregiver. It can be a family member or someone who has been recruited to do this kind of work. And that gives us a different flavor because you build that kind of family-type relationship that many people want or have, and these folks can live independently and in their community. So what you'll see, and I'll go into greater detail as we go on, is that this relationship is overseen by a nurse and a care manager who comprise a care team. The caregiver files an electronic note, which is reviewed on a daily basis, and if there are issues or concerns, our folks can follow up immediately, or we're in the home every other week, then we can follow up there. So that I wanted you to have a basic understanding, and you'll see the slide again at the end, so hopefully this will give you the basis to understand what I'm talking about and understand the opportunities that we have. Rich, we can have the next slide, please.
There you go.
So who benefits from structured family caregiving? Now that you've seen the slide, I've kind of given this one away, but I'll put a finer point on it. It's people who want to live independently, who don't want to be institutionalized, and want to live as much in their communities as they can in a home-like setting or actually with family on a 24/7, 365 basis. There's also another bullet point that's not on the slide but is important, and any of you involved with caregiving will know that there is tremendous stress and strain on the caregivers. So another benefit, who would benefit from this? Anybody who cares about their caregiver, because while we provide primary support and oversight to what we call the consumer, the person receiving services, the way we structure the service, we also provide support for the caregiver. And there's an alternative caregiver as well, which I'll talk about a little bit, but that person can step in and provide respite. But we also keep an eye on the caregiver and the health of the entire relationship. And that is one of the things that is an added benefit in this service. Next slide, please. The history of structured family caregiving, it is a new service, but it is a proven service. This was started by our parent company, Senior Link, in Massachusetts in 2007. Today, we serve over 2,000 people in this service, and it is in, as you see, Massachusetts, 2007. Rhode Island is a global waiver. It's called Shared Living since 2010. In Ohio, it's on the developmental disability side since 2011, and Indiana adopted this on the developmental disability side in 2012, and on the aging side for the aged and disabled waiver this year, 2013, and it is now an effective service in the state of Indiana. So we will begin serving people very shortly. Next slide, please. The goals of this service, as you might imagine, I think they're self-evident, but I want to walk through them and, again, highlight a few things. Independence, that's the first bullet point. We really can't overemphasize this. This is an option that lets people who really have that will to keep on living the way they have to the greatest degree possible, an option that might not have existed for them before. The person has to have a fairly significant need, though. They have to be both Medicaid eligible, and they have to also have a nursing facility level of care, so that they are declining, but this is something that helps them, or they have declined. This is something that helps them stay where they are. Dignity and respect are a big deal, and as is privacy, and the more home-like the environment is, in this case the environment is home, the stronger those elements will be. We also do have outstanding health care outcomes, lower than average falls and lower than average rehospitalizations and that kind of thing. So because the person builds a strong relationship with their caregiver, there's that intuitive sense of what's going on and perhaps something's wrong and we shouldn't wait. We should get on it right away. And so, again, the fourth point focuses on independence and helps to keep the consumer as much in charge as possible. Next slide, please. Allowable activities. Medicaid speak for the kinds of things that the caregiver, the primary caregiver or the alternative caregiver, are expected to do. And these are, I think, pretty much what you would expect people to be doing in this circumstance. There's nothing here that's really surprising. You'll see most of this list again when we go to the next slide. But if you just take a moment to look it over, you'll understand perhaps what the day of a caregiver would be like. And I think the bottom bullet point here is something that's important because there's flexibilities, other appropriate supports as described in the individual service plan. Service standards require the documentation that this is something that's necessary for the individual and that they have the level of service that will meet their needs. So it is a Medicaid service, and those things are well documented. I hope this slide gives you a sense of the kinds of things that a primary caregiver does. Can we go to the next slide, please?
Sure. And Peter, if I could interject here, because I think
Sure.
this is new to the state, and some people have had a little bit of confusion. Caregiver Homes is not actually providing the care, right?
That's correct. We are new to the state. We're building out across the state as we identify the need and as we can keep our promises. And so we are new to the state, and the service is new to the state.
Okay.
All right. Activities not allowed. You can't have a parent of a minor child, spouse, or a legal guardian serving as a primary caregiver. That's simply prohibited. There are what appear to be significant conflicts of interest there, and so those are not people who can serve in that role. This is also not a medical service. This is a daily living service, if you will, or habilitation. So if somebody needs more skilled medical care, that's available to them and that can be provided, but it's not something that our primary caregivers are responsible for or frankly allowed to do. And then I told you in the previous slide that you would see that list again, and here it is in the bottom bullet point. Activities that will not be allowed. So Medicaid will not pay again for somebody to be for homemaker services because they expect the primary caregiver to do it. Respite services, which are critical for caregivers, are addressed by the fact that there is an alternative caregiver who is trained and credentialed like the primary caregiver to step in. The primary caregiver provides transportation, emergency oversight, so we don't need a personal emergency response system, attendant care, assisted living, and so on. So you get a sense of the scope of what this person's supposed to do. And again, I think what it really speaks to is how much this is a home, and that you build a family, you either have or build a family kind of relationship as you go into this. So this really is a very special service. Can we go to the next slide, please? Now, Rich, you mentioned confusion a moment ago. Here's another source of confusion, and that is that structured family caregiving does differ from what we used to call adult foster care, or what's now in Indiana called adult family care. And some people have believe, and it's a rational belief, that they're the same thing. In fact, on the developmental disability side in Indiana, the community integration and habilitation waiver, when they introduced structured family caregiving, they did away with adult foster care. So that's led to some confusion, and it's helpful to address that. And again, this will show you how structured family caregiving stands apart as a service. We don't own the homes. It's not necessarily true on the adult family care side. This is the home of the consumer or the person we're serving, so whether it's their home and someone moves in with them, whether they move in with the caregiver or whether they find, let's say, an apartment together, it is their home. A family member can be a caregiver with the exceptions that I told you. It's very common for a child, an adult child, obviously, to take care of an aging parent in this service. Room and board payments, which are part of adult foster care, are not a part of this service. They're certainly allowed, but they're not regulated under the waivers. There is a biweekly visit required, and the way we do it is that we have a nurse and a care manager, and they can trade off visiting every other week. They can go together as a team both times. It's whatever works for them, but they have to be in the home twice a month or every other week, putting eyes on people and making sure that everything's okay. Now, here's where a lot of magic really happens, and it's something that's pretty special, and it's called the electronic daily note, and that's required. The caregiver is, by us, issued right now a netbook. They have to have internet service in their home, and the netbook is locked down so they can only do this function, which is communicating with us through a daily note where they give the person's status. And so that it's a prescribed set of questions they answer with the opportunity to fill in text. And every one of those notes is read by a member of the care team. The nurse and the care manager can switch off days reading, or they can work out some kind of other arrangement. We have eyes on that every day, so we know what's going on in the home. And if there's an immediate response necessary, we can look into it. If it's something that you put on a list to check on the next time they're in the home, we can do that as well. But that's a level of knowledge that is uncommon in this world, and it's something I think is pretty exciting. Obviously, services are provided in the person's home as opposed to somebody else's home or an institutional setting. And unlike adult family care, we don't do up to 4 people. We might do 2 if there's a family relationship, but no more than that. In one area where we've had a conversation or 2 is where there's been a parent taking care of a child with severe disabilities. The parent can no longer do it because of age. We might be able to accommodate that kind of situation, but it's something we look at pretty closely. So I hope this draws a pretty fine distinction between the 2 kinds of services and helps you understand what we do a little bit better. Next slide, please. Okay. The consumer eligibility requirements, and I've already said this briefly, Medicaid eligibility and level of care eligibility, which means they're at risk of institutionalization. Without the waiver, they're failing in several activities of daily living and they need some kind of supports. The physician has to certify that this is a necessary service for them, and they have to have a suitable caregiver and a suitable home. And we credential the home. We make sure that it's safe for them. So you wouldn't want somebody on a walker having to go upstairs to go to bed or to use the restroom, for instance. You want to make sure that there's a good way to get out of the house in case of fire. But the home is safe and properly maintained. If they choose the home other than the fundamental life safety issues, that's what we look into. Next slide, please. Caregiver eligibility is also very important. Over 18 years old, which I think is more than commonsensical, has an acceptable criminal background check as defined by the state, has an acceptable character references. We really do look into people to make sure that it's going to be an appropriate mix. Receives clearance from a physician. Again, you wouldn't want somebody with multiple disc injuries in their back to be responsible for lifting necessarily. And they receive the Division of Aging, that's what DA stands for, required training that includes, but is not limited to, person-centered care, individual rights, CPR, first aid, and they complete daily requirements as identified on the service plan. And that just doesn't mean the daily notes. That means what the person actually needs. So they're capable of doing that. So that gives you an idea of who the primary caregiver is. The alternative caregiver, while they are number 2 on the list and they can step in at any moment, we don't treat them as if they are secondary. They go through all of the training. They go through all the same background checks because we want to make sure, and the state wants to make sure that if something happens, either a planned respite or an emergency, that this person that we're serving is still in as good a shape as they would have been without the caregiver. We have the next slide, please. Referral process is as it would be for a normal waiver. The person is eligible. They're given a list of services and providers. It's called the pick list. They work with their case manager to pick a service provider, hopefully us for this service. And then they start the waiver services selection and matching process. We go to the next slide, please. Opportunities for people in the state of Indiana. We currently have 3 branch managers. We'll be going statewide, and there will eventually be at least 10. Those are people who have minimum college, ideally post-grad work, capable of marketing, managing an office, handling regulatory demands, and managing staff. So that's a skill level of management, if you will. Registered nurses, and that's fairly obvious. They don't work in institutional settings. They're virtual to a large degree, although they can come into the office to fill out work, drop things off, check in, have meetings, and so on. And social workers, care managers, and I've talked about both of them, and they have the same kind of remote virtual obligations. They're out in the community, in people's homes, working as a care team. This is startup. When we get to steady state, our objective is to have the care team have a caseload of 40 and a driving radius of 60. For those interested in these two positions right now, you need to understand that we need people to stretch, and as things become more normalized in terms of the operating rhythm, that's our objective. And of course, we're looking for office assistants as well, and those are more than receptionists, maybe some of the characteristics and duties of an office manager, but they are at an office assistant level at this point. Next slide, please. The steps in our process would be, if you're interested, to go on the MMS website, do the digital interview. We will review those, and for those we wish to speak with, there will be a telephone interview and then possibly an in-person interview. And should we obviously go to the next step in training orientation, and then we look forward to putting you to work. Next step, please. Or pardon me, next slide, please. That's my contact information. I've gone through this very quickly. It's a lot of information. I think we'll be open to questions this evening, but also you're welcome to follow up with this later if there's more that you'd like to know.
All right, thanks you, Peter. I appreciate it very much. Let's let me go here and unmute. Hang on just a second. There we go. All right, I'm going to unmute everybody. And if you have a question for either Peter or for Susan Gregg, go ahead and ask. Lines are open. All right, I'll go ahead and jump in first, Peter, because we've been talking.
Sure.
Our firm has been talking with a lot of people, as a result of our partnership and helping you roll this out into the state. A question that comes up, particularly for people that are interested in the registered nurse position or in the care manager position, is how big are the caseloads that they might be handling, and what is, what's the difference? I know you said that these are for the most part virtual positions, people working from home. Well, how big is the caseload? How much driving are people going to have to do?
Well, thank you, Richard, for that question. Again, our objective is that the care manager and the nurse will eventually share a caseload of about 40 individuals, and we want to keep the driving radiuses to around 60 miles maximum. Because this is a startup, we're going to need people to stretch first, and so they may have fewer people, but they might have to go a longer distance, or more people in a more compact area. It just depends on the needs of the consumers as we get started. But as we get to steady state, our objective is 40 people in the caseload and about a 60-mile driving radius.
Okay, thanks. Anybody else have any questions?
I would be interested in knowing if you have like any educator positions open, which would be RN type training position for your program.
Well, in terms of like a corporate trainer?
Right, for other RNs and caregivers like that. Mm-hmm.
At this point, no, we do not. But I would add this, that part of this work it's a training responsibility, because the RN and the care manager are both training the caregiver, and I think to some degree helping to educate the consumer. So there's an ongoing element of education in these jobs, but it's not that traditional classroom type work.
Okay.
But I'd like to add that as we grow across the state and as our staff grows, we'll definitely need that staff development, clinical nurse specialist role, kind of help us stay current with disease state management issues, behavioral health, etc. So if you are qualified as a nurse educator or staff development, then I would encourage you to apply. We may not have a position today, but I would think within the next year we probably would.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
And I would imagine, Susan, that you'll draw those people from people that are already part of the team that have been doing the job too, wouldn't you?
Exactly. as well as, you know, Indiana and healthcare in general is changing, and the managed care model of service will be coming to Indiana probably within the next 5 years. And so as a company, we're very forward-thinking and somewhat visionary. So we're already starting to look at a strategic plan that would have our organization accredited by NCQA, which then means we have to meet a certain set of standards. So it's because we are a newer service, and managed care companies are now becoming more and more responsible for managing home and community-based services, or also what we refer to as long-term services and support. We are moving towards that direction of professionalism and, against the staff development, so we can stay on top of all of those needs.
Okay.
Thank you. Other questions?
I have a question about the social work. Are you looking for BSWs, MSWs, licensed clinical social workers, any of the above, all of the above?
All of the above. License would be wonderful.
Okay. Okay. And is there like a general salary range? I mean, are you?
There is.
I can answer that. Yes, even though we feel this is a advocation, we do have staff. So we have done market studies, and I can tell you that our wages are very competitive. Our benefit package is very competitive. We do contribute to employees' 401ks, have a wide range of benefits. And I believe, you know, without going into a lot of detail, we will be able to be competitive in the market.
Okay. Okay. Thank you.
Good question.
Sure. Thank you.
Other questions? Let me ask you another one, Peter, that we hear often when we're talking to people about the different positions. Who's responsible for coordinating the billing to be set up for the consumer, and who's responsible for handling all that? Does the that's something that the RN and the social worker are going to be involved with?
This is one of my favorite parts of this business. In so much of this, it's an hourly rate, and you have to tick and tie a whole lot of service. And frankly, in my opinion, it detracts from the service because it requires so much effort. This is the daily rate. When the caregiver files the daily note, that enables us to bill for that day. If they don't file it, we can't bill. So we stay on top of that. The electronic note comes to us. We handle the billing. We have an agreement with the caregiver, who's an independent contractor, and then we pay the caregiver based on that. So it's a very straightforward, simple process, and it's not something that the nurses or the care managers have to deal with. It's not like a traditional deal where you're going into the home and filling out hours in a notebook, and then someone sends it to the office and they key it all in later. This is much more streamlined than that.
So it sounds like the caregiver is doing most of the documentation for this, and it's not going to be something that the RN or the social worker will be spending hours, documenting every visit that they did.
Well, that is also automated to a large extent, and we're continuing to work on that. But they're not, again, unlike some services, they're not doing what happened in this quarter hour and that quarter hour. They're doing health and welfare. They're working on the relationship and all those kinds between the caregiver and the consumer, the home, and all those things are documented. But it is the issues that keep people healthy and keep them from, I won't say deteriorating because nature does what nature's going to do, but keeps them from having unnecessary injuries or at least reducing them, that the nurse and the care manager will look at. So the documentation they do is much more proactive, perhaps, than in some circumstances at least.
I see. Okay, great. We are at the end of the 30-minute time period that we said that this presentation would last. So we appreciate everybody who has joined, and I can see that there's a lot of interest in this. We appreciate everybody who has joined and been a part of this. If you need to leave, please don't. We won't consider that rude. If you need to go, please do. We're at the end of the 30 minutes. But if you do have another question, I know both Peter and Susan will be happy to stay around for a few more minutes and answer those if there are any. Last call. Okay, it looks like that we don't have any more questions. Everybody who registered for this presentation, you're going to get an email in about the next 30 or 45 minutes that will give you a link for each of the positions that are available for this opportunity. You can go to that link, get more information. It'll also take you right to the digital interview, which is the first step in the process. So we encourage you to do that. And there will also be a contact person in that email that you can call if you have any questions about the process. Thank you again for your attention, and we hope to hear from you soon. Peter, Susan, thank you also for your time.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Have a
Richard.
good evening.
Thank you.
Have a good evening.